The kiss felt wrong. Not bad, just wrong like wearing someone else's coat that's almost your size, but the sleeves are slightly too long. James pulled back, smiled, and I told myself I was being ridiculous. Pre-wedding jitters, stress, exhaustion from planning, but somewhere deep in my chest, an alarm was ringing. Quiet at first. It wouldn't stay quiet for long. I'm Elena, 24, and I thought I knew the man I was going to marry better than I knew myself. James and I met 3 years ago at a coffee shop near my apartment. He'd grabbed my latte by mistake. I'd grabbed his black coffee, and we'd both taken a sip before realizing. We laughed about it, exchanged numbers, went on our first date that weekend. He was perfect, kind, thoughtful, ambitious, but not obsessive, the kind of man who remembered small details and showed up when he said he would. We moved in together after a year, got engaged after 2. The proposal was sweet, intimate, exactly what I wanted, no grand gestures, just the 2 of us on our apartment balcony at sunset, him nervous and fumbling with the ring box, me crying before he even finished asking. Planning the wedding was everything I'd imagined. We kept it simple, personal, just 75 guests at a vineyard outside the city. James handled it all with the same calm efficiency he brought to everything, his job in finance, his friendships, his relationship with me. He was steady, reliable, mine. And then, 4 weeks before the wedding, his company sent him on a business trip. London, 2 weeks, crucial client meetings he couldn't miss. I understood. His career was important, and 2 weeks would fly by. We'd been apart before. The night before he left, we stayed up late talking about final wedding details. He reminded me to confirm the photographer, said he'd call every night, kissed me goodbye at 4 a.m. before his car arrived. I watched him leave, already missing him, counting down the days until he'd be back. He called that first night from his hotel, told me about the flight, the meeting schedule, how much he missed our bed. His voice sounded tired but normal. We talked for 20 minutes before he said he needed to sleep. I told him I loved him. He said it back. Everything was normal. The calls continued for the first week. Brief, affectionate, routine. Then they started getting shorter. He said the meetings were running long, the time difference was brutal. He'd call when he could. I understood. I focused on wedding prep, spent time with my bridesmaids, counted down the days. He came home on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks exactly after he'd left. I was at work when he texted saying he'd landed, that he'd meet me at the apartment. I left early, picked up his favorite Thai food on the way home, practically ran up the stairs. When I opened the door, he was standing in the kitchen, unpacking his suitcase. He looked up, smiled, and something in my chest tightened. He looked like James. Same dark hair, same green eyes, same tall frame, same smile, but something was different. Something I couldn't name. I crossed the room and kissed him. That's when I felt it, the wrongness. The way his lips moved against mine, the angle of his head, the pressure of his hands on my waist. Different. All of it, subtly, impossibly different. I pulled back and studied his face. He looked at me with slight confusion, asking if I was okay. I told myself I was being insane. 2 weeks apart, of course things would feel slightly off at first. We'd readjust. I forced a smile, said I'd just missed him, handed him the Thai food. We ate dinner and he told me about London. The meetings, the clients, the hotel, everything sounded right, but his cadence was different. The rhythm of his speech, the way he paused between thoughts. James always spoke in this specific pattern, quick bursts of information, then longer pauses where he'd think before continuing. This man spoke more evenly, more steadily. I kept noticing small things. The way he held his fork, fingers positioned slightly differently than James did. The way he sat on the couch, leaning back instead of forward, like James always did. The way he watched TV with focused attention instead of James's habit of checking his phone every few minutes. That night in bed, he reached for me. I let him, trying to silence the screaming in my head. But his touch was different. The way he moved, the places he kissed, the rhythm all different. Not bad, just not James. Afterward, I lay awake while he slept beside me. I stared at his face in the darkness, trying to find what was wrong. Everything looked right, but it felt so completely wrong. The next morning, I made coffee the way I always did. French press, 3 minutes steep time, poured into his favorite mug. He took a sip and thanked me, said it was perfect. But James always added honey. Every single morning for 3 years, James added honey to his coffee. This man didn't even reach for it. I asked casually if he wanted honey. He looked confused for a moment, then said no. It was fine as it was. I felt cold suddenly, despite the warm kitchen. Throughout the day, I started cataloging the differences. He asked what time my dentist appointment was. I didn't have one scheduled. James would have known that. He suggested we order pizza for dinner, but James hated pizza, was always insistent about it after getting food poisoning from it in college. He put his keys on the entry table instead of the hook by the door where James always hung them. Small things. Tiny things. Things that could be explained by stress or tiredness or 2 weeks apart. But they kept accumulating. I tested him subtly. Asked him to tell me about the night we met, and he told me the story perfectly, the coffee shop, the switch drinks, the first date. But he said we went to an Italian restaurant. We'd gone to Thai food. I'd remember that forever, because James had been nervous and ordered the spiciest thing on the menu to seem impressive, then spent the whole dinner sweating and trying not to show it. I asked him about his scar. James had a small scar on his right forearm from a bike accident when he was 12. This man had no scar there. When I pointed it out carefully, he looked at his arm and said it must have faded. Scars do that sometimes, he said, but I'd traced that scar with my fingers 100 times. It doesn't just disappear in 2 weeks. That night, I lay awake again while he slept. I pulled out my phone and looked at photos of James, recent ones, from before the trip. I zoomed in on his face, his hands, his arms. Everything looked identical to the man sleeping beside me, but it wasn't him. I knew it wasn't him. I couldn't explain how I knew, couldn't point to one definitive thing. But every cell in my body was screaming that this man was not James. I started to think I was losing my mind. Maybe the wedding stress was breaking me. Maybe I was having some kind of psychotic break. I made an appointment with my therapist, Dr. Morrison, for the next day. But first, I did something that felt insane. I waited until the man who looked like James left for work, and then I searched the apartment. I went through his suitcase first. His clothes, all familiar. His toiletry bag, normal. His passport, I opened it, checked the photo. James's face. The name James William Cooper. Birth date correct. Everything correct. Then I found his work bag and went through it systematically. His laptop, his notebooks, his pens. Everything looked normal until I found his glasses case. James wore contact lenses. He'd worn them every single day since we met. He only wore glasses late at night. After he took the contacts out, they were reading glasses, thin wire frames, a very specific prescription. The glasses in this case were different, thicker frames. Different prescription, I could tell by holding them up to the light. These weren't James's glasses. My hands started shaking. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, closed the bag, and sat on the floor of our bedroom trying to breathe. That afternoon, I went to see Dr. Morrison. I told her everything, the wrongness, the small differences, the missing scar, the glasses. I expected her to tell me I was stressed, anxious, projecting. Instead, she asked me very carefully if I felt safe at home. The question stopped me cold. Did I feel safe? I thought about it. This man hadn't threatened me, hadn't hurt me, hadn't done anything overtly wrong. He'd just been, not James. I told her I didn't know. She suggested I stay with a friend for a few nights. Give myself space to think. She also said something that stuck with me. Trust your instincts. Women are trained to doubt themselves, to rationalize away their discomfort. But our instincts exist for a reason. I left her office and called my best friend Sarah. I asked if I could stay with her for a few days, told her I needed space from wedding planning. She agreed immediately, said I could stay as long as I needed. Then I did something that felt both crazy and necessary. I called James's mother. Patricia answered on the third ring, warm and cheerful as always. We chatted briefly about the wedding, about her flight arrangements. Then I asked her something specific. I asked if she remembered the story about James's bike accident, the one that gave him the scar on his arm. There was a pause. Then Patricia said carefully that James had never had a bike accident. He'd been terrified of bikes as a child, never learned to ride one properly. The world tilted. I asked her to repeat that. She did. James never had a bike accident. Where did I get that idea? I said I must have confused him with someone else. Thanked her, hung up. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. If James never had a bike accident, why did the man I'd been living with have a scar there? Why did he have that scar for 3 years? And why was I so certain I'd seen it, touched it, asked about it? Unless there were 2 of them. 2 men who looked identical. And I'd been living with one of them, while the other was somewhere else. The thought was impossible, insane, but it was the only thing that made sense. I started researching. Identical twins. Separated at birth. Adoption records. I searched James's name, his birth records, anything I could find. And then I found it. A single newspaper article from 28 years ago, barely a paragraph long. Twin boys born at County General Hospital. One kept by the biological mother, Margaret Cooper. One placed for adoption through a private agency. James had a twin brother. A brother he'd never mentioned. A brother he maybe didn't even know existed. I sat in Sarah's apartment, staring at my laptop screen, trying to process what this meant. If James had a twin, and that twin somehow found him, learned about his life, his job, his fiancé, my phone rang. The man I lived with, asking where I was. I told him I was staying at Sarah's for a few days, needed some space. He sounded concerned, asked if everything was okay, if he'd done something wrong. His voice sounded like James. But it wasn't James. I told him everything was fine. I just needed a few days. He accepted it, said he loved me. I couldn't say it back. The next morning, I hired a private investigator. His name was Marcus, mid-50s, former police detective. I told him everything, the trip, the differences, the twin possibility, the wrongness of it all. He listened without judgment. Then, he said something that made my blood run cold. He asked when James was supposed to have returned from London. I told him 2 weeks ago. He asked if I'd verified he actually went to London, if I'd seen his boarding pass, his hotel confirmation, anything concrete. I realized I hadn't. He'd said he was going. I'd trusted him. Marcus told me to give him 72 hours. He'd find out everything. Those 3 days were the longest of my life. I stayed at Sarah's, ignored calls from the man in my apartment, and tried not to think about the implications of what I suspected. On the 3rd day, Marcus called. He told me to come to his office. He said I should sit down for what he was about to tell me. I drove across the city, climbed the stairs to his 2nd-floor office, and sat in the chair across from his desk. He had a file folder in front of him, thick with documents and photos. He started talking, and with every word, my world crumbled. James had a twin brother named Daniel. Daniel was adopted at birth by a family in Oregon, grew up completely separate from James. But 6 months ago, Daniel had done one of those DNA ancestry tests. Found a match to a half-sibling, started digging, found James. Daniel had contacted James privately. They'd met, started building a relationship. James had been excited, overwhelmed, planning to tell me after the wedding when things were calmer. He wanted to surprise me with the news that he had a brother. But Daniel didn't want a relationship. He wanted James's life. Daniel had been watching James for months, learning his mannerisms, his habits, his relationships. He'd gotten a job at James's company under a fake name, observed him at work. He'd followed us, learned about me, about our relationship, about the wedding. And then, 3 weeks ago, Daniel had killed James. Marcus slid a photo across the desk. Security footage from a parking garage. 2 men who looked identical, standing by a car, one of them holding something, the other falling. James's body had been found in the woods outside the city 4 days ago. Unidentified at the time because his wallet, his phone, everything that could identify him was gone. The police had logged him as a John Doe, were waiting for someone to report him missing. But no one had reported James missing because everyone thought he was alive. Everyone thought he'd come home from London. Daniel had killed his own brother, taken his identification, his phone, his laptop. He'd gone to London using James's passport, attended James's meetings, called me from James's phone. Then he'd come back and stepped into James's life as if he'd always been there. I sat in Marcus's office, unable to speak, unable to process. The man I'd been living with, sleeping beside, kissing he'd murdered James. He'd murdered the man I loved and taken his place. Marcus was still talking. He'd alerted the police, shown them everything. They were preparing to make an arrest. But first, they needed my help. They needed me to act normal, to go back to the apartment, to pretend I didn't know, because Daniel didn't know we'd figured it out, and if he ran, they might never catch him. I asked how long I'd have to pretend. Marcus said 24 hours. One day, The police would arrest him tomorrow night when he came home from work, would stage it to look random so he wouldn't suspect I'd been involved. I wanted to scream, to refuse, to never go near that man again, but I thought about James, about what Daniel had done to him, about the fact that my fiancé was dead in a morgue while his murderer slept in our bed. I agreed. That night, I went back to the apartment. Daniel was there, cooking dinner, acting concerned about where I'd been. I smiled, apologized for being distant, said I just needed to clear my head about wedding stuff. He believed me, pulled me into a hug, kissed my forehead, said he understood wedding stress was intense. I forced myself not to flinch, not to run, not to scream. We ate dinner, we watched TV, we went to bed, and I lay awake beside my fiancé's murderer, counting down the hours until morning. The next day felt endless. Daniel went to work like normal. I called in sick to my job, stayed in the apartment, waited. The police had told me to act normally, so I cleaned, did laundry, tried to keep busy. At 6 p.m., I got a text from Marcus. It was happening. The police were moving in. I was supposed to be at Sarah's when it happened, supposed to be safely away. But I needed to see it, needed to watch them arrest the man who'd killed James and tried to steal his life. I positioned myself across the street, in a coffee shop with a clear view of our building entrance. At 6:30, Daniel's car pulled into the parking garage. At 6:40, he walked out of the elevator into the lobby. At 6:41, 4 police officers converged on him. I watched through the window as they grabbed him, pushed him against the wall, handcuffed him. He looked confused, was saying something, probably claiming they had the wrong person. But they didn't. They had exactly the right person. One of the officers showed him a photo. I couldn't see what it was from where I sat, but Daniel's face changed, went from confusion to understanding to pure rage. He looked up, scanned the street, and somehow, impossibly, his eyes found mine through the coffee shop window. For one horrible moment, we stared at each other, the man who'd killed my fiancé and the woman who'd helped catch him. Then the police dragged him away. I sat in that coffee shop for an hour after they left, unable to move. Eventually, Marcus called. He told me Daniel had confessed to everything once he realized they knew. Killing James, stealing his identity, planning to marry me and take everything James had built, his savings, his life insurance, his reputation. Marcus said Daniel had been obsessed with the idea that James had gotten the better life. Better parents, better opportunities, better everything. He'd wanted to take it all away, and he'd almost succeeded. The next few weeks were a blur of police statements, funeral arrangements, grief. James's family was devastated. His mother apologized over and over for not telling him about his twin, for not knowing the adoption agency could release information now, for not protecting him. I told her it wasn't her fault. None of us could have predicted this. The wedding was canceled, obviously. The venue, the flowers, the photographer, I had to call everyone, explained that the groom was dead. Most people didn't know the full story, didn't know about Daniel. We kept it quiet, tried to protect James's memory. Daniel was charged with first-degree murder, identity theft, fraud. His trial is next year. I'll have to testify. We'll have to sit in a courtroom and look at the face of the man I loved while knowing it belongs to his killer. But I'll do it. For James, for justice, for the truth. 3 months after James died, I was cleaning out our apartment. I couldn't live there anymore, and I found something in his desk drawer. A small velvet box, hidden in the back. Inside was a man's wedding band. Silver, simple, engraved on the inside, E+J forever. He'd already bought his ring, had been planning to surprise me with it, had been so sure we'd make it to forever. I held that ring and finally let myself break. Cried for hours, for the life we'd planned, for the man I'd lost, for the horror of living with his killer and not knowing. People ask me sometimes how I figured it out, how I knew something was wrong when everything looked so right. I tell them the truth I knew because I loved James, really loved him. Loved him enough to know the exact pressure of his kiss, the precise rhythm of his breathing, the specific way he held his coffee cup. Love isn't just knowing someone's face, it's knowing their soul. And Daniel, for all his planning and observation and practice, couldn't fake James's soul. The wrongness I felt wasn't paranoia or wedding stress or premarital doubt. It was my heart recognizing that the man I loved was gone and someone else was wearing his face. Trust that feeling. That instinct that something is wrong even when you can't explain why. It might be the only thing that saves you. I never got to marry James. Never got our forever. But I made sure his killer didn't get to steal his life completely. And in some small way, that feels like keeping my promise to him. Until death do us part. His death, not mine.